The attic door creaked, a sound too deliberate to be the old house settling. Mara froze mid-step, the floorboards beneath her groaning in protest, though the hallway behind her was empty. Moonlight sliced through the tattered curtains, painting long, jagged shadows that danced across the walls, and in that silver glow, everything familiar felt wrong. A whisper floated down from above, faint but distinct, Mara. Her name. Her blood ran cold. She spun, expecting someone, anyone, but the hallway was deserted. Only the silence pressed back, heavy and unyielding, as if the house itself were breathing, waiting. She took a cautious step forward, her heels clicking against the worn wood. Another creak from the attic answered, sharper this time, like fingernails scraping against old beams. The shadows seemed to lean closer, and the air tasted metallic, thick with something she couldn't name. Then it happened. A door slammed somewhere upstairs. No wind had passed through the house. No one was there. Panic prickled at her spine as she glanced back. The hallway stretched, endless and unfamiliar. The photos on the walls crooked, though she had not touched them. A draft carried a faint, acrid smell, and somewhere deep in the dark, a floorboard groaned under invisible weight. Mara's hand trembled as she reached for the attic door. Something waited above, something that knew her, and then a voice closer this time, urgent and cold. You shouldn't be here. Mara's fingers lingered on the attic door handle, cold sweat pricking her palms. She had not meant to return here. Not yet, not so soon. But the letter from her estranged uncle had left no choice. It's time you see the house again, it had said, in that familiar, jagged handwriting. The ink smudged in places as if it had cried while writing. The house, her childhood home, sat at the end of a lane choked with overgrown weeds, and the skeletal remains of trees long abandoned by care. Now, standing in the hallway she remembered so well, it felt like it had grown taller, its ceilings pressing down, its walls whispering in corners she didn't remember. The first thing Mara noticed were the small things, the way the air smelled of dust and damp, with a trace of something sharper, almost metallic. The old photographs lining the walls were askew, their frames tilted, despite her certainty that she had left them straight. A porcelain doll sat on the staircase railing, its glassy eyes catching the moonlight and following her as she moved. She shook her head. Just the house settling. Just old bones groaning, she told herself, but the words sounded hollow even in her own ears. She stepped cautiously down the hall, heels clicking against the warped floorboards. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the house itself was weighing her down, slowing her, pulling her deeper inside. In the kitchen, the sink dripped, 1, 2, 3 slow drops, but the tap had been off. Mara froze, straining her ears. The drip continued, stubbornly rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat counting down. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a sudden harsh intrusion. She pulled it out, expecting a text from her uncle. Nothing. A single empty notification. She swallowed, a lump of dread rising in her throat. Why had she come back? The thought was fleeting, quickly pushed aside by a creeping awareness. She was not alone. Not truly. A soft shuffle behind her made her whip around. The doorway to the living room was empty. The curtains swayed, though no breeze had come through the broken window. She forced herself to laugh, bitter and short. It's the house, nothing more. Then came the voice. Barely audible, almost drowned by her own racing heartbeat. They never leave. Not really. Mara's stomach dropped. She wanted to speak, to demand who was there, but the words lodged in her throat. The voice had come from the hallway, yet no one was visible. She backed up slowly, her mind racing through possibilities. A neighbor, a trick of acoustics, maybe even an animal. But the cadence, the deliberate tone of the words, told her none of these explanations were enough. She remembered the stories her mother used to tell. Shadows that lingered in corners, whispering names of those who had died in the house. Superstitions, old wives' tales meant to frighten children. She had laughed at them once, sure of her rational mind. But now every creak, every breath of wind, every misplaced object felt like confirmation. And the house seemed to know it, feeding on her fear, extending it, shaping it. Mara's steps took her to the staircase. The wooden banister was cold beneath her fingers. The attic loomed above her, a dark, yawning mouth, silent except for that subtle, unplaceable sound, like dragging feet or the scuff of nails on old wood. She hesitated, breathing shallow, fighting the instinct to flee. But something compelled her onward. The letter, the unresolved questions, the gnawing suspicion that what had happened here before, what had been hidden, was not done. Her mind flickered back to the last time she had been in this house. She had been 12. She remembered running from room to room during a summer thunderstorm, hiding from the shadows she imagined were monsters. But now she realized the monsters were real, and they had waited patiently for her return. At the top of the stairs, she paused. The attic door loomed larger than memory allowed, the shadows pooling around its edges like ink and water. Mara swallowed and forced herself to reach for the knob. The metal was icy, burning her fingers despite its cold touch. A whisper brushed her ear, closer than before. "You shouldn't be here." The words wrapped around her chest like chains. Mara's pulse raced as she tried to rationalize, tried to tell herself that it was her imagination, that the house was old and creaky and full of memories too potent to be ignored. She hesitated for a heartbeat longer than reason allowed, and then she turned the knob. The attic door groaned open, revealing darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the thin moonlight spilling from the hallway. A single, small movement caught her eye. A rocking chair, shifting slightly, though she had not seen anyone sit in it. And in the corner, something gleamed faintly. A locket, a ring, a photograph, an object left just so, as though waiting for her. Her breath hitched. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to leave the house behind, to never return. Yet her feet moved forward. Step by slow step, she crossed the threshold into the attic. And somewhere in that darkness, she felt the house exhale. An invisible presence, patient, watching, and certain of her arrival. This was no ordinary home, and Mara was no longer a visitor. Mara paused in the attic, her eyes straining against the suffocating darkness. The rocking chair had stopped moving, but the air still carried a weight, pressing against her chest like a hand she couldn't see. She reached for the object in the corner, a small, tarnished locket. When her fingers brushed it, a shiver ran through her spine. Opening it revealed a tiny photograph of a woman she vaguely recognized. Her grandmother, young, smiling, but the eyes seemed hollow, staring not at the camera, but through it, through Mara. The memory hit her like a sudden gust of wind. Stories her mother had whispered when Mara was small. Tales that had seemed harmless then, of family members disappearing, of shadows that lingered in rooms long after people had left. Her grandmother had once said cryptically, "The house remembers, and it keeps what it wants." She had laughed, dismissed it as eccentricity, but now, standing there, Mara understood the weight of those words. The locket slipped from her fingers and clattered against the wooden floor. The sound echoed unnaturally in the attic. Mara jumped, her heartbeat a frantic drum. From somewhere below, a floorboard creaked again, slow and deliberate, though she was certain she was alone. Voices from the past. Mara picked up the locket again, her hands shaking. Something compelled her to open the small journal lying nearby. Dust and age had yellowed the pages, but the ink, dark and furious, was still legible. She began to read. They watch from the corners. You cannot hide from the house, for the house remembers your blood. A chill wrapped around her. The handwriting was familiar. It matched her uncle's letter, but older, more desperate, as if written by someone terrified beyond reason. Flipping further, she found entries that detailed strange occurrences. Objects moving on their own, whispers calling names, family members disappearing in the night. Mara's fingers trembled as she read. A sudden noise, a whisper behind her, made her spin. "Mara." The voice was soft, intimate, yet hollow, echoing through the attic. She knew no one was there, yet the whisper carried weight, familiarity, inevitability. Her rational mind screamed for explanation, for reason, but none came. Micro-events. The house awakens over the next hours, or was it days? Time seemed to bend in the house. Mara experienced subtle horrors that built her paranoia. The rocking chair moved on its own, the creak matching a heartbeat she could feel in her own chest. The floorboards whispered under invisible feet. A photograph of her uncle shifted positions overnight. In it, his eyes seemed darker, sunken, as though he were watching her. The mirrors reflected her movements a fraction of a second too late. As if something behind her delayed, each incident chipped away at her certainty. Friends and neighbors avoided speaking about the house. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, muttered as Mara passed by, "It doesn't forgive. You don't get out." Not really. Mara had tried to laugh, but the words clung, stubborn and sticky, leaving her uneasy. She wondered if she had imagined them, but the weight in her chest said otherwise. Flashbacks. Family curse revealed as Mara read more from the journal. The house seemed to hum in agreement. Entries described tragedies spanning generations. Her great-grandfather, obsessed with a mysterious inheritance, had vanished without trace. Her grandmother spoke of voices in the night, always warning, never explaining. Deaths in the family were frequent, sudden. Often after returning to the house, Mara's mind struggled to connect dots she didn't want to see. Every family member had been drawn back to this house, and every one of them had suffered, disappeared, or gone mad. Another passage made her stomach twist. They are patient. They wait. The blood calls them home, and they will take all who belong. The word "they" was never explained. Mara felt it in her bones. Whatever haunted the house was ancient, deliberate, and bound to her bloodline. Paranoia intensifies. Mara began to notice the smallest irregularities. The smell of her grandmother's perfume in empty rooms. The faint sound of children laughing in the hallway, though the house had long been abandoned by them. Doors she had closed earlier were open when she returned. Objects subtly rearranged. Her dreams bled into her waking hours. At night she awoke to the sensation of someone standing at the foot of her bed. Shadows moved against the walls, watching, whispering her name. Her reflection sometimes didn't mirror her movements immediately. One night, sitting by the fireplace, she heard her uncle's voice, clear and impossible. "You shouldn't be here." "It knows." She spun, heart racing, but the room was empty. The locket lay on the floor, closed, as if mocking her. Disturbing interactions. Mara's few attempts to seek outside help failed. Neighbors were tight-lipped, doors closed, windows shuttered. One frightened teenager whispered as Mara passed, "The house. It's alive. It chooses who leaves. Don't let it see you alone. Even talking to family on the phone felt wrong." Her cousin's voice trembled as they said, We lost them. All of them. Don't stay too long." Each word, each warning was a thread tightening around her chest. The house was not merely a building. It was a sentient, malevolent entity, watching, remembering, waiting. Mara realized she could not leave. The house had already decided she belonged. The first confrontation, it began subtly. One evening, the attic floorboards shifted under her weight, though the room was empty. A door slammed somewhere below, followed by the sound of dragging, deliberate, heavy footsteps. Mara ran to the staircase, but the steps stretched impossibly long. The walls seemed to lean in, the ceiling pressing down. A whisper trailed her as she moved. "Stop running." "You cannot hide!" She collapsed against the wall, gasping. Shadows pooled in corners, darker than the night outside. The temperature plummeted. Her breath fogged in front of her. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet she could not move. Something unseen pressed against her, pressing her memories and fears to the surface. Signs of the house's power over the next few days. The micro-events intensified. Objects moved violently if she ignored them. Mirrors reflected unfamiliar rooms. Doors that did not exist. Voices called names she did not recognize. The air seemed alive, filled with whispers she could never fully understand. Mara began to question her sanity, but the house provided cruel proof that her fears were real. Her grandmother's journal entries, the locket, shadows that followed her relentlessly. It was no longer a home. It was a trap, alive and hungry, feeding on the blood of its inhabitants. Cliffhanger to climax. One night, Mara discovered a hidden doorway behind a wall in the attic, revealed only by a loose panel. A strange cold emanated from it, like breath from the grave. She hesitated, remembering the journal's words. "They will wait. They will not forgive. Blood calls blood, and none escape the house." Her hand hovered over the handle. A whisper, urgent and chilling, caressed her ear. "Open it, or leave, and you will never leave." The house held its breath. The shadows deepened, and Mara realized that whatever lay beyond that door would change her life forever, if she survived. Mara's hand trembled over the handle of the hidden attic door. The cold that radiated from it seemed alive, crawling under her skin, into her veins. Every instinct screamed at her to run, yet she could not tear herself away. The house waited. Its breath was on her neck. Shadows pooled like liquid in the corners of the attic, stretching toward her, reaching, and she felt the weight of generations pressing down. With a deep, shuddering breath, she turned the handle. The door groaned open, revealing a narrow staircase that spiraled downward into blackness. The air was thick, foul, with the unmistakable scent of decay and cold iron. Mara hesitated, her mind flaring with images of every warning she had ever received. The journal entries, her cousin's trembling voice, Mrs. Halloway's muttered words. But a deeper, almost sickening curiosity pushed her forward. Step by step, she descended. At the bottom, the room opened abruptly. It was a long hall, lined with mirrors on both sides. But the reflections were wrong. They did not mimic her movements. Instead, they shifted slightly after her, delayed, distorted. Some showed her with hollow, sunken eyes. Others showed the faint outlines of figures standing behind her, just beyond her vision. She gasped. "Who's there?" she whispered, voice cracking. No reply, only silence. Then a chorus of whispers, soft, indistinct, layered. "You shouldn't be here. You belong. We've been waiting." The whispers grew louder, overlapping, pressing against her skull until it felt as if the walls themselves were speaking. Mara stumbled, clutching at the mirrors for support. In one reflection, she saw her grandmother, young again, smiling, but the eyes, hollow and accusing, bored into her soul. Suddenly, the hall twisted. Mirrors elongated, walls bent inward, and the floor beneath her rippled. Time seemed to fragment. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes collapsed into flashes. Her own reflection stepped forward independently, reaching for her. "Stop," Mara screamed, trying to run, but the hallway stretched, endless and impossible. A hand, cold and spectral, brushed her shoulder. She spun, but no one was there. Then a voice, her uncle's voice, guttural and distorted, whispered, "You cannot leave. You belong here, all of us. All gone because of this house, and now, you." Mara felt the floorboards groan violently beneath her, and she fell, scrambling backward. A mirror shattered, and shards reflected countless versions of her own terrified face. They blinked, mouthed words, but no sound emerged, only a cold, crushing presence. The house reveals itself. The hall seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting, as if alive. The mirrors dissolved into blackness, replaced by shadows that moved of their own accord. Mara felt unseen hands gripping at her, pulling her toward the far end of the hall, toward a single door that had materialized. Its surface was warped wood, veins crawling like black roots across it, pulsating with life. "No," she whispered, backing away, but the shadows closed in. The door opened on its own, revealing a room filled with family portraits. Each face twisted in agony, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. Mara recognized some, great-grandfather, grandmother, cousins who had vanished. The last portrait was of her. A cold voice, deep and inhuman, resonated from the room. "Blood calls blood. You cannot escape what is yours," Mara screamed, slamming her hands against the floor, but the house itself seemed to rise up, walls bending, ceiling lowering. Doors appeared where none had existed. Staircases led into darkness. Time fractured further. She could see the past, moments of family members disappearing, the house feeding on them, twisting them into shadows that now surrounded her. "Why?" she cried. "Why us?" "Because you came back," the voice said, calm, omniscient. "Because you belong." Psychological breaking point. Mara staggered backward, the shadows pressing close, whispering all the names of the dead. She stumbled over objects that were not there moments before. Broken toys, shattered plates, letters stained with ink, and something darker. Her own thoughts betrayed her. Were the voices her imagination, or had the house consumed the minds of her ancestors to speak through it? She could feel herself slipping, reality unraveling. A figure appeared before her, a distorted, half-formed version of her uncle. His eyes were hollow, black pits, and his mouth moved independently of sound. "Join us," it hissed. "We wait forever." Mara turned to run, but the hallway stretched impossibly long. Her own reflection, fractured and twisted, reached out from the mirrors again, grabbing at her. whispering in voices she knew. Her mother, her father, all warning her, pleading, accusing. You shouldn't have come. It's too late. We tried to warn you. The pressure of the shadows was unbearable, her chest constricting as if the house were squeezing the life out of her. She fell to her knees, gasping, clawing at the floor. Every attempt to flee failed. The house was alive, omnipresent, omniscient. The entity manifests from the darkness. Something rose. Not fully human, not fully shadow, a twisted amalgamation of every lost soul in her family line. It moved fluidly, limbs stretching impossibly, eyes flashing in and out of existence. Whispers converged into a singular, deafening voice. You cannot escape. You will stay, as we stayed. As they stayed, Mara shrieked, backing toward the attic door she had entered from. It slammed shut on its own, locking her in. The walls breathed, the shadows pressed closer, and the entity extended a black, clawed hand toward her. She could feel her sanity fraying. No, I won't. She sobbed, crawling backward, the entity's voice twisted, mocking, yet familiar. You already belong. You always did. Her memories flashed, every time she had laughed in this house, every time she had ignored warnings, every subtle sense that something had been watching. And now, every memory, every fear, every shadow converged on her, threatening to pull her into the same fate as her ancestors. Final confrontation. Mara stumbled to the floor, clutching the locket. A faint glow emanated from it. She remembered the journal, the words. The blood calls, but some can resist if they confront the truth. Not yours, she screamed, holding the locket high. The shadows recoiled, screeching in silence. The entity paused, momentarily slowed by the defiance in her voice. But the house was patient. It did not give up. The walls twisted, mirrors shattered, and the voices roared around her. She screamed again, louder, and felt a surge of energy from the locket. Images of her ancestors, some pleading, some screaming, flashed, merging with the shadows, pushing back the darkness. For a moment there was balance, then the entity surged, faster, overwhelming, an unstoppable tide of blackness and whispers. It touched her, and she felt a cold, absolute weight crush her mind. The locket slipped from her hand, falling to the floor. It never ends, she whispered, voice breaking as the shadows closed in. Collapse of reality time fractured completely. Mara's screams echoed endlessly, distorted, layered over the laughter and cries of generations. The attic became infinite. The hallway stretched into eternity. Mirrors reflected not one Mara, but countless versions, each consumed by the entity, each screaming, each lost. The entity loomed over her, its form flickering, impossibly vast, swallowing the ceiling and walls. Her own thoughts betrayed her, memories twisting into grotesque shapes, her family's history replaying in every detail, every horror. You belong, the entity intoned, voice merging with the house itself. Her last coherent thought, I came back. I shouldn't have. Then darkness, complete and absolute. Transition to resolution. The house exhaled, calm, patient. Shadows pooled back into corners. The entity withdrawn, yet omnipresent. The attic was still. The locket lay on the floor, faintly glowing. The mirrors were intact, reflecting only darkness. Mara was gone, or perhaps became part of the house itself. Another shadow waiting for the next return. The house waited. Always, patient, eternal. The house was quiet, too quiet. The attic, once a maelstrom of shadows and whispers, now lay still. Dust motes floated lazily in the thin shafts of moonlight, and the floorboards seemed to sigh under their own weight. The locket Mara had dropped glimmered faintly, like embers of a fire long extinguished. The air was colder than before, carrying a weight that pressed down on the chest, almost tangible. Yet no one stirred, no one spoke. Outside, the wind rattled broken window panes, but inside there was nothing but silence. The house had exhaled and settled. Everything looked normal, or as normal as it could in a building that had swallowed generations whole. The photos on the walls were upright again, though some eyes seemed darker, hollow, almost too knowing. The rocking chair in the attic was still, yet it creaked faintly, as if breathing, waiting. Mara did not return. Days passed. The neighbors noticed her absence but said nothing. Her cousin called once, voice trembling, then hung up. Her uncle's house stood at the end of the overgrown lane, untouched and unyielding, as if it had absorbed the very passage of time. Anyone who glanced at it felt uneasy, a cold shiver climbing their spine, a sense of being watched. No one wanted to go near it. Inside, the house remembered. It waited. The aftermath for a brief moment. In the aftermath of Mara's disappearance, the town carried on as usual. Children played in the dusty fields, dogs barked in the distance, and the wind whispered through the trees. But anyone who had ever been inside that house, or had been connected to its family, felt a subtle shift. A sense of incompleteness, as though a piece of reality had been lost. Mrs. Holloway, the elderly neighbor, muttered quietly to herself as she swept her porch. It always takes the curious ones, the ones who can't leave well enough alone. Her eyes flicked toward the house, and for a moment, her expression softened into fear. She did not say Mara's name aloud. Saying it would have invited attention, but the words hovered between her teeth, unspoken, heavy. The local children began avoiding the lane at night. They whispered among themselves about shadows that moved where no one stood, about faint laughter echoing from within the walls. Stories spread, as old stories always did, each retelling darker than the last. Lingering shadows inside the house. Things moved subtly, imperceptibly. A floorboard groaned. A curtain shifted. A mirror reflected not what was, but what had been, or what would be. The house had absorbed Mara. It had claimed her bloodline, folding it into its endless, echoing chambers. Those who had once entered noticed changes, though they often dismissed them as tricks of memory. A whisper in the hallway. A faint figure reflected in the mirror that didn't match their own. Doors that had been closed were open the next day, though no one had touched them. The house remained alive, patient, waiting. Some nights, long after Mara had vanished, a faint figure could be glimpsed at the top of the attic stairs. A shadow of a young woman, hesitating, staring down the long hall, eyes wide with fear and recognition. Then, as if noticing an intruder's gaze, she vanished. The house's memory, the house remembered everything. It remembered Mara's footsteps, hesitant, searching. It remembered her touch on the locket, her desperate scream as the entity closed in. Every object, every shadow, every whispered name was preserved within its walls. Even in her absence, Mara's presence lingered, an echo. A reminder to anyone who might one day step inside. You shouldn't be here. The journal she had found lay open on the attic floor, pages yellowed and fragile. The entries ended abruptly, the final words scrawled in urgency. They wait. Blood calls blood. You cannot. The page tore, fluttering in a draft that had no source, settling gently back onto the floor. Unseen observers weeks later. Someone dared enter the house, a real estate agent, ignorant of the stories, hoping to inspect the property for sale. The first thing she noticed was the air, thick, suffocating, older than any house she had ever entered. The second was the silence, absolute, oppressive, waiting. She walked the hallways slowly, cataloging cracked paint and broken boards, unaware of the subtle movements just beyond her vision. The rocking chair in the attic shifted slightly as she passed. Mirrors reflected faint shadows she couldn't identify. Objects seemed to shift when unobserved, returning to their old places when she looked away. She paused in front of the attic door. Something felt wrong. The temperature dropped. Her breath formed clouds. A faint whisper reached her ears. Stay. You belong! The agent's hands trembled as she reached for the knob. She pulled back, heart pounding. Something in the house was alive, waiting. She left, never returning. The house waited, always. The final scare. The ultimate horror was subtle, almost invisible. Mara was gone, yet her presence persisted. The locket, once vibrant in her hands, glimmered faintly in the attic, untouched. If the wind shifted just so, a whisper could be heard, a voice calling, familiar and distant. The shadows seemed to lean, wait, as if acknowledging her absence but not her release. And in the stillest moments, when the moonlight caught the attic just right, you could see a figure, small, tentative, standing at the top of the stairs. The figure would look down, as if inviting the living to join, eyes wide, mouth opening in silent warning. Then, like a shadow swallowed by darkness, it would vanish. No one spoke of it, for fear that speaking aloud might awaken what waited within. The house had claimed its bloodline once more. And though the body was gone, the echo remained, an eternal warning, a memory stitched into the walls, a lingering presence that refused to release its grip. The neighborhood returned to quiet nights. Children avoided the overgrown lane, and the adults spoke of the house only in vague, fearful terms. Yet anyone who passed by felt it, a weight in the air, a cold that touched the spine, a sense of being watched. The house remembered. The house waited. The house had always been hungry, and it would wait forever. Resolution features. Psychological. Lingering horror over gore, focused on aftermath, isolation, and inevitable doom, subtle but terrifying final imagery, the locket, shadows, and Mara's echo, leaves reader uneasy and reflective long after finishing. Atmospheric. Cinematic and narrative-driven. Quiet terror over overt jump scares.